Hello, and welcome back to Zenin Fanfics. Today we're starting part 4 of an exciting new series. What if Deku became the most feared villain? If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content. The story we're featuring is written by Toast the Spaghetti in the Oven on archive of ourown.org. You can find all the relevant links in the description, so be sure to check out the author's profile and say hello. Now let's dive into the story. Izuku pushed and rolled the tire through the sand toward the others. In the final stretch, he gave it one last big push, sending the tire rolling until it hit the others and fell to its side. He dusted the sand off his hands and stared at the setting sun. Izuku smiled at the progress he had made. There was only about a quarter left of the beach to clean, but even then it was just the big stuff. Since he started, he had just been gathering the trash on the edge of the sand on the street, but at one point someone had started coming by when he wasn't around and taking it. He assumed to a dump, but either way the trash he cleared off the beach was no longer there, except for the stuff from this week. It seemed like a good place to end for the day, so he picked up the old drone controller he found and walked back to his living quarters. Opening the metal door, he grabbed a few tools and the camera he stole from UA. He took a seat on the edge of the doorway and tore open the back of the controller and camera. He pulled out wires and replaced things with other wires. He kind of was just messing around, not knowing what he was doing with both, but then just closed them up and hoped for the best. He powered up the controller, the screen lighting up. Turning on the camera, he stared into the lens and saw that his face showed up on the screen of the controller sitting on the floor. Izuku punched the air. Hell yeah! Gently placing the camera on the ground, Izuku picked up the controller. Hovering his fingers over the joysticks, he slowly pushed one of them forward. The camera gradually lifted from the ground, making him internally cheer. Holy shit, it's working. He reprimanded himself to stay calm, so as not to mess up and accidentally break something and mess everything up. He began to lift the camera farther off the ground and move it around. He flew it in circles, gradually taking it out farther and farther away from him. Feeling confident, Izuku launched it into the sky and watched the city from the camera. It was nothing new from when he jumped across the rooftops. Bringing it back, the controller began to beep loudly, the screen showing a low volume sign in the corner of the screen. Izuku started trying to fly it back as fast as he could, even walking toward it, looking to meet it halfway. In the distance, he could see it in the air, but the beeping that was drastically getting louder ceased. Izuku threw the controller into some grass and started running as fast as his legs could take him as the camera began to rapidly drop from the sky. He dove for it in the final stretch, but of course he wasn't that lucky as it hit the ground and shattered just a few inches from his hands. Damn it! He yelled as he got up, his knees and elbows now scraped and bleeding. He kicked a few of the pieces, but stopped when he noticed the camera itself inside the robot was still in one piece. He picked it up, inspecting the still intact camera, then grinned. The surrounding robot could be fixed or even remodeled, but Izuku wasn't confident in the camera. Collecting all the pieces, or at least most of them, he brought them back to his home and dropped the stray pieces into a corner. He'd fix it at a later date. He looked at his Nightwalker outfit and nodded before throwing it on. Shoyuta was soaring over rooftops when he heard the sounds of a fight happening a few streets over. Rushing over, he was met with the usual vigilante fighting someone twice his size. Standing on the top of one of the surrounding buildings, he sent his capture scarf toward the legs of the villain and just pulled as hard as he could. The legs getting pulled from underneath him caused the villain to then hit his face as hard as possible on the ground and knock out. What the hell? I had him, Nightwalker yelled up to Shoyuta. What was this kid's deal with receiving help? He watched as the vigilante dejectedly kicked the guy passed out on the ground, then sent the finger up to Shoyuta still up on the roof. Shoyuta hopped down after already informing the authorities, but the kid just climbed the fire escape on the side of one of the buildings. Once Shoyuta had the villain dealt with and in the back of a police car, he climbed up the fire escape, finding the vigilante a few roofs away. The kid was swinging his legs back and forth as he sat on the edge. Shoyuta approached him and took a seat next to him. That was you at the entrance exam, wasn't it? MHM. Did it for fun. We know. We all could tell. If the laughing everyone heard wasn't obvious enough. The kid giggled. The cameras picked up on that? I wasn't sure if they picked up sound. Shoyuta chuckled. You had quite a few of them close enough. They definitely picked it up, he paused. Sign language, huh? Learned it for an old friend. It's come in handy over the years. That surprised, but also didn't surprise Shoyuta. There was something about the kid doing stuff for others that seemed out of place. Considering the amount of time Shoyuta has come across him fighting someone with not much care for the victims in those situations. Seeming to only be a vigilante to fight people and nothing else. Seeking the thrill from it. Wait a minute, that would make a lot of things make sense. Shoyuta pushed away the thought. He just had this feeling that the kid will protect what needs protection until his dying breath. He also had the feeling that the kid was always hoping for his final breath. They sat in silence, just staring out into the city. So, Inko, what lady did you steal that from? Nightwalker slowly put an end to the swinging of his legs. My mother, he said quietly. Shoyuta noticed the cease in movement. He spoke with a softer tone. She must be worried with you out late all the time. He shrugged. She would be. Does she know? He was quiet. I like to think she does. What kind of cryptic shit was that supposed to mean? You gonna tell her one day? I have. Then how? She's dead? There was an awkward pause, maybe more so for Shoyuta than the kid. I'm sorry, Shoyuta said. The vigilante wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. It's fine. Shoyuta lifted his hand to rub his back and comfort him, but hesitated and ultimately just put his hand back down. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just staring off into the distance, watching the city. Nightwalker started moving next to him, and then was up and standing. I'm gonna go. Shoyuta, still sitting in the same position, looked up at him and nodded. See you later, kid. The vigilante just walked away and down a fire escape. Shoyuta remained there a little longer. It was a quiet night, and there was something that had him pondering. The name Inko, but especially now finding out that she's dead. Then something came over him, and he quickly shot up and made his way to the police station. Bursting in at Sakkachi's office, the detective splashed coffee on the front of his shirt. Apparently, it wasn't hot, though, as there was no reaction besides him, just looking at Shoyuta, utterly confused. Can you do me a favor? Sakkachi immediately put down his mug. I need you to look up a name. Inko. The detective turned toward his computer. Last name? Don't got one. She's deceased. Probably on the younger side. Has a son. The detective types in a few things before the search brings up a list of women all ranging in ages. They scrolled through the women, going through each one, but none of them felt or seemed right. They continued to search when a familiar pair of green eyes looked at him. Shoyuta shot out his hand and pointed at her. That one? Inko Midoriya. Clicking on her file, they both read through her information and how she died. Both looked at the name of her son and were shocked to see deceased right next to it. Pulling up the file for him, they looked at the picture of Izuku Midoriya and both instantly recognized him. Immediately, Sakkachi pulled out a manila folder from his desk drawer with one file in it. Shoyuta pulled the manila folder closer to him and stared at the picture, a familiar feeling washing over him. He looked up at the sticky notes sitting on the corner of the desk and pulled one from the pile. Holding it to the picture, he covered the lower half of Izuku's face, starting from the nose. Everything instantly clicked and fell into place. Holy shit, it's Nightwalker. What? Like the vigilante. Shoyuta picked up the picture and held it in front of the detective. That's him. His quirk was registering it as true, but that doesn't mean the detective wasn't confused. How? He's dead. I don't know, but that's him. They both looked at each other and just nodded in agreement before Sakkachi grabbed the manila folder and relabeled it the Emerald Nightwalker. Shoyuta looked at the picture, now just laying on the desk. I think it's time we bring this kid in. Izuku was looking at the bouquets, sitting in a squat, his elbows resting on his knees as he sniffed a few of the flowers. He had on a white button-down tucked into a black pair of slacks and a black and white pair of Converse on. His hair was pulled back in a half-up, half-down situation with a small bun sitting on the back of his head. The bell in the store rang, alerting the owner of a new customer, but Izuku didn't see anyone walk in. About a half a minute later, the bell rang again, and a man walked in. Izuku didn't like him. He didn't like a lot of people, but there was just something about him that was setting off signals in his head. He stood up and gave the man a better look over. He was decently dressed in a polo shirt and jeans, had a bit of weight, and looked to be in his late 40s. He seemed to be looking for something but must have finally spotted it because he smiled. Run! Get out! A sense of fear washed over him. The signals got louder and were blaring in his head, warning him, but he couldn't move. The guy had his eyes glued to something on the other side of the shelf, but Izuku couldn't see what it was. He pushed everything he was feeling down and tried to ignore the guy and go back to picking out a bouquet, but he walked around the shelf and behind him, his reptilian tail sliding past Izuku's feet. A shiver shot up his spine, so Izuku continued to stare at the guy who was laser-focused on something on the other side of the shelf. His eyes moved and followed it as it appeared to move back and forth, then toward the door. Izuku's stomach dropped when he finally saw what the guy was staring at. A little girl, no older than 5, skipped over to the shelf of flowers sitting by the window of the store. She went back and forth looking at all the different ones with a smile on her face as she tried to sniff all of them. The man approached her with a smile on his face. He knelt down on one knee and held out a small flower in front of him, catching her attention. She turned toward him and smelled it, the biggest smile crossing her face. Izuku's heart skipped a beat. He recognized her. He knew her, and he knew that wasn't her dad. Izuku looked around the store and out the window for her parents, but they were nowhere in sight. Izuku watched as she nodded to something he said, and then he stood up with the same smile still on his face. Izuku really didn't want to deal with him, but he wasn't about to let something happen to her, a kid no less. "Inari," Izuku called, immediately getting the girl's attention. He waved her over. "Come look at these ones. They smell so good too," Izuku said with a smile. She happily hopped over, and the guy watched her leave with an irritated look on his face. He looked at Izuku, getting a little relieved probably after seeing his young-looking face. Izuku glared at him, anger in his eyes. Maybe it's because of the way Izuku was dressed, making him appear older, but the guy quickly got the message and walked out of the store. He let out a breath of relief, finally feeling like he could breathe normally again. Izuku squatted down next to Inari, still sniffing all the flowers. "Smells nice, right?" he said, a small smile back on his face. He was trying to come across as welcoming as possible, as not to possibly scare her off or cause a scene. Even though she seems to trust just about anyone. She nodded her head like crazy, agreeing at the nice-smelling flowers. Izuku picked up a bouquet of white lilies and held them in front of her. She stuck her face in the bouquet, then pulled it out with the biggest smile and nodded. "That's what I was thinking." He stood up and held out his empty hand to her. "Are you getting those ones?" Inari asked as she took his hand. Izuku nodded and walked with her to the front counter and paid for the flowers. He took a single flower from the bouquet and bent down, handing it to her. She hopped up and down as she gleefully took the flower. Inari retook his free hand with hers, and they walked out of the store. "Let's go find your parents now, shall we?" Izuku walked while she skipped down the street, both still hand in hand. She eventually pointed to a store, and they walked in. "Mommy, Daddy," Inari called into the store. Izuku watched as two heads stopped their frantic search around the store and quickly made their way to the front. She let go of Izuku's hand and ran up to her dad, who was now kneeling on the floor a few feet away with his arms out. Her mother was right behind him, scolding her for walking off, but then embracing her in a hug. Inari's mother profusely thanked Izuku, who just stood there with flowers in one hand and his other in his pocket. Hisashi looked up from his daughter to do the same thing, but paused. Izuku watched as emotion after emotion, relief to anger, happy to sad, crossed his father's face. Izuku plastered on a smile. "Mr. Midoriya, is that you?" Hisashi looked almost sick. His wife, however, looked at him and at Izuku confused. Looking for answers from her husband, Izuku gave them before he could say anything to her. "He and my mom were friends in college. He used to come over to gatherings my mom held when I was younger." She looked at Hisashi, who looked between her, and Izuku then just nodded. "Can I talk to him for a bit, catch up on things?" Hisashi asked his wife. "Of course. I'll go look for more pants in your size." The new Mrs. Midoriya smiled and took Inari and walked toward the back of the store. Hisashi got up and followed Izuku out of the store. "How are you alive?" Izuku dropped the smile, which sent a chill down Hisashi's spine. He faced the street and shrugged as he leaned against the window to the store. "I wasn't in the fire, if that's what you're wondering." A wave of sadness washed over Hisashi's face, but was quickly replaced with fury. He opened his mouth to say something or possibly yell, but Izuku interrupted him. "You get my UA acceptance letter?" "That was you." Hisashi was taken aback for a second, but disbelief followed soon after. "Cool. I couldn't remember if I wrote down the right address or not." Hisashi didn't believe him in the slightest. He was quirkless, there was no way he could pass such an exam. He furrowed his eyebrows. "What do you want?" "Nothing yet." Was this picking up flowers? Izuku held up the bouquet. He gestured to the store behind him. "You should pay better attention to her, or you might lose the kid with the quirk." "Are you threatening me?" He almost laughed. Izuku paused thinking about it. "Yes," he said. He technically was. He glared at his father. "If I feel you pose a threat to her or hurt her in any way, I'll take her away so fast you won't even realize she's gone. No begging from you, or your wife will help you." Hisashi took a step back, but then went to laugh. Izuku stopped him before anything escaped his mouth. "Go ahead, laugh. But considering she almost got taken today by someone other than me, you're already walking on thin ice. This one actually has a quirk and deserves a father in her life. No kid deserves the life I was given." Hisashi didn't know what to say. Izuku stood up straight from leaning on the window. "I have to go, my mother's waiting for me." Hisashi didn't move as Izuku walked past him and down the street. Izuku didn't like most people, but something about the guy from the flower shop he really didn't like. He just got a feeling from him that sent shivers up his spine that he couldn't just ignore. He searched for the man online, which was a lot more difficult than he thought it was going to be. Although he shouldn't have been surprised since he only had a description and a feeling as a starting off point. It took him a few hours, but eventually he had an identity: Tucker Show. Izuku immediately began his search into Tucker. He looked for anything that would come off as suspicious, but he appeared otherwise spotless. Then he found out where he lived and decided to stake out his house. Izuku hopped into his vigilante outfit and made his way over there. It took him quite a while to find the place, but upon finding it, immediately started searching around the premises. Izuku peered into windows, searched his backyard, and broke into his car. There was nothing to find or have reason to suspect anything until he decided to search his garbage. He found boxes for security cameras in his trash bin, but there were none on the outside of the house. What did he need to keep an eye on inside? Izuku finally had a bouncing off point and knew what he could do next. Cameras or technology, and he didn't want to toot his own horn, but he was sort of a magician with it. He ran back and to his computer. He didn't see much from the outside of the house, but what if he was in the house? He easily managed to hack into the cameras, and his stomach dropped. The first camera was pointed to a hallway and one door. The second was a room, and huddled into the corner as far away from the door as possible was a group of children. They were extremely malnourished, wearing thin clothing that was either too big or too small, bloody, bruised, and dirty. Izuku didn't know how to feel. One thing he did feel was sick. He had so many questions, but first he needed some air and a breather. He sat outside the cafe for a few minutes just staring out into the street before walking back in and getting a large black coffee. Sitting back down, he calmed himself and got straight to work. He identified each of the children, finding each of them listed as missing persons. There were roughly a dozen of them, all ranging in ages from 4 to 10. The older they were, the longer they'd been there, which didn't make him feel any better. Izuku looked through as much of the footage as he could, watching as from time to time children would be dragged out and brought back a couple hours later. The younger ones seemed to fight it more when being dragged out of the room, while the older ones seemed to just accept it and walk out willingly. It was starting to remind him of Sir from the foster home. Izuku transferred the camera feed to his phone before he closed the laptop and raced back home, dropping off his computer and grabbing a notebook and pen. He ran back to Tucker's place and climbed onto the roof of the convenience store a few houses down. The sun was beginning to rise as Izuku got comfortable and waited. He watched as a couple of hours later, Tucker got in his car at 7 and left. Izuku wrote that down and waited for him to return, which he did many hours later at around 5. He then left a few hours later around 8 and didn't return until closer to midnight. Izuku watched him for over a week, taking notes on everything he did. He stuck to a similar schedule except for during the weekend. He was a little more unpredictable then, but it wouldn't change Izuku's plan much. During the week, the children often were only fed once a day, if that, and it usually happened in the morning before Tucker went off to work. He would just throw something in like they were dogs. It was never enough for all of them, and they split it off the best they could, but they never fought. Tucker seemed to sporadically pick and choose children, but never took out more than 3. He would drag them out sometimes for a couple of hours after he got back from work, but regularly brought a few out after he got back closer to midnight. Izuku assumed it was a bar he visited in the later hours because he was always a little wobbly and couldn't stand straight whenever he walked to the front door. How he safely got home every time continued to confuse and annoy him. Izuku watched him for another week, nothing really changing. His back was killing him due to him not really leaving the roof, except maybe to use the bathroom. Other than that, he sat and watched, sleeping between the hours Tucker left for work or the bar. Today was different, however, and Tucker arrived back from work angry. He slammed the car door and stomped up to his house, slamming the front door as well. Izuku didn't know what he was doing inside, but about an hour later, he opened the door to the children's room and dragged out 2 of the kids. One was the oldest, and she walked out willingly. The other was one of the younger ones, and he screamed and cried at first, so Tucker pulled him out by his hair. Izuku was trying to convince himself that it was him learning as much as he could before just jumping in, but deep down he knew it was fear. He knew subconsciously he was scared of Tucker, because it was just another Sir in the world. It was probably why signals immediately went off when he first met the guy and still haven't gone away. But they were instantly pushed away when Izuku watched as only one of the 2 kids was returned to the room a couple of hours later, and Tucker got in his car right after. Izuku catapulted into action. He replaced the camera feed from footage of a few days earlier and quickly shot Eraserhead a text of the location of the house. The kids were the most important thing in this situation. It didn't matter how much he might want to kill this guy. The children's safety came first and foremost. So it's better to have the backup than not. Eraser, of course, responded back asking how he got the number, but he just told him it was Nightwalker and ignored any other messages the hero sent. He climbed down from the building right as he saw the car turn the corner. Running to the house, he started picking the lock to the door right away, getting in a second later. He frantically searched the house for the little girl until stumbling onto her lifeless body in the middle of the living room. Izuku fell to his knees in front of her, putting his ear to her CHSD no. No, no, no. He started giving her CPR. His hands interlocked together. He pushed down on her CHSD in a rhythmic beat, pausing every 30 seconds to hear if she was breathing. Please, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I wasn't strong enough again, I know, but please just... Izuku was crying for her to just open her eyes. He was begging and pleading as he continued giving her CHSD compressions. Tears were streaming down his face, blurring his vision. He paused and checked for a pulse, but nothing, so he continued knowing it was probably no use. In a bout of anger, he pounded on her CHSD, then just put his head down and cried, apologizing for being too late again. As he laid there in the silence of only his sobs, he felt a very faint breeze on the back of his neck. Then again. Izuku put his ear to her CHSD and focused. Relief washed over him, tears continuing to fall. He fell onto his back and just tried to get his breathing back to normal as he rubbed his eyes, trying to get the crying to stop. The little girl began to move a little. Izuku rolled her onto her side and gently rubbed her back. "Are you here to save us?" "Yes," Izuku said with no hesitation. She started crying, and Izuku just continued to rub her back. She eventually sat up and laid against the couch. Izuku stood up to get the other kids, telling her to just wait there. He ran downstairs and kneeled in front of the door, picking each lock as fast as he could. Finally getting all of them, he slowly pushed the door open. The children were huddled into the corner, silently crying, presumably distraught over the death of the oldest. They turned and were startled by Izuku. He sat on his knees and pulled his mask down, trying not to look threatening. Izuku spoke in a soft voice. "You're going to be okay. I'm here to save you and get you out of here. You have nothing to be afraid of anymore. You're safe." A few of the younger ones ran up to him, hugging him or grabbing onto his hoodie. The rest of them seemed to sit and stare at him almost in disbelief. "You're going home?" Izuku nodded. "Mister," the oldest called from upstairs. The other children were shocked to hear her. Izuku just nodded, letting them know she's okay. The front door opened. Izuku cursed at himself for not hearing the car pull up. He quickly stood up and slipped his mask back on. "Don't go anywhere. I'm not locking the door, but don't come out until I come back and get you. I'll be right back." The kids started to panic, but he reassured them he'll be back in no time, that there was nothing to worry about. Izuku closed the door and ran upstairs. He came face to face with Tucker putting down a bag of supplies down on the kitchen counter. "Run! Get out! Run! Go now! Who the F are you?" Tucker yelled and rounded the counter, stomping toward him. Izuku frantically looked over to the living room and saw the little girl hiding behind the arm of the couch. "Get back to the others. Hurry! Run!" he shouted to her. He pushed back Tucker as she ran behind Izuku and downstairs. "You're quite a small thing." Tucker smiled as he towered over Izuku. He froze, staring up at him. Izuku held up his fist, but his feet were stuck to the ground. He was physically shaking all over. "Run! Go! Now!" Everything was telling him to run, to get out of there as fast as possible. But he couldn't. He was not going to leave the kids behind. Tucker stomped toward him, and his body screamed for him to move. Izuku rolled out of the way and quickly pulled out one of his knives. He turned to face him, but was hit in the side by his reptile tail. Izuku smashed into the wall, and his knife went flying out of his hand, sliding across the floor. Izuku dropped to the ground as Tucker approached him and tried kicking out legs. It didn't go quite as planned, but he did inevitably fall to the ground. Izuku went to get up, but Tucker pulled at his leg, causing him to tumble. Izuku clawed at the ground, trying to get away as he was pulled closer to him. Izuku was pinned to the floor with his tail as he was forced to stare up at him. Tucker smiled and licked his lips as he pulled down his mask and was surprised to find he recognized him. He laughed, and his smile grew wider. Izuku was frozen, finding no use to struggle even if he could. His breath quickened as tears poured out his eyes and down the side of his face. He was still weak. "Don't move," Sir whispered next to his ear. He felt his hoodie get pushed up and hands begin to grope him. Tucker licked the side of his face and moved his way down his chest, then stomach. Izuku felt cold, scaly hands wrap around him and move about his chest. Tears spilled down the side of Izuku's face, but he wasn't crying. He was barely conscious. Just a shell of a body. Hitoshi would still be alive if he wasn't such a coward. Sir undid his pants and slipped a hand in. He stroked his inner thigh before making his way up. Izuku froze as a hand touched and felt and squeezed. Tucker stroked his inner thigh before making his way upward and squeezing. He lifted Izuku's waistband and snapped it as he let it go. He started to unbuckle his pants. Tears flowed even quicker out of his eyes. He felt something warm touch his leg. Izuku felt like he was trying to hide away inside of his own body. Izuku couldn't even call for help if he wanted. His mouth felt glued shut no matter how much he tried to open it. "Nightwalker!" Eraserhead yelled. For just a split second, something almost seemed to surge through Izuku. Call it instinct or reflexes, but Izuku grabbed one of the knives from his belt and sliced, cutting Tucker's PP clean off. Eraser pulled him off of him and threw him toward a wall a second later. Izuku hadn't even realized what he did. Just 1 second Tucker was on top of him, and the next second Eraser was kneeling in front of him. Izuku was sitting up but sort of hunched over and staring at the ground, his eyes blank, still sort of hiding away inside of himself. Eraser was asking him questions about if he was hurt and if he was okay. Izuku slowly got up, ignoring the hero, and looked at Tucker, sitting tied up in the scarf against the wall. It all came rushing back up at him. Izuku screamed as he ran toward him. "You killed him," he yelled, pulling a knife out and stabbing him over and over again. "You killed him." Eraserhead pulled him off Tucker. Izuku cried and screamed, struggling to escape from the grasp. The hero brought him to the other side of the room. Izuku started grabbing at his ears and pulling at his hair, getting blood in his curls and on his beanie. The hero grabbed at his hands and pulled them away from his head to keep him from hurting himself further. He was yelling something at him, trying to get his attention, but Izuku didn't know what he was saying through the screams and sobs, until he heard something familiar yet foreign. His name. "Midoriya! Midoriya!" Eraser yelled over the crying. "Izuku! Izuku!" Izuku slowly stopped the screaming, but crying only seemed to get worse. Tears poured down his face, the hero slowly letting go of his hands. Izuku's head hung low as he continued to sob until he leaned forward. The top of his head now against the hero's chest, Izuku reached up and gripped the back of Eraser's shirt, and slowly the hero lifted his arms and gently wrapped them around the vigilante. He rubbed circles into his back, making Izuku only hug him tighter, until slowly the crying seemed to sputter out. They remained in the hug as Eraser asked him questions. "You feeling better?" Izuku just nodded, then slowly pulled away and rubbed his eyes as he sniffled. "What were you doing here?" Izuku remained quiet, not really answering the hero. He took a deep breath and then slowly released it out his mouth. That's when he realized his mask was still down. He wanted to put it back up, but there was no point. Izuku didn't say anything, just waved for Eraser to follow. Passing by the body, without even glancing at it, Eraser followed him downstairs. Izuku approached a door and slowly opened it. He walked in, and only then did he speak as he kneeled down, telling the children that the person behind him was a friend and a hero. They all rushed at Izuku and hugged him in this giant group hug. "You're going home?" he whispered to them. Izuku got up, and they held on to his fingers and clothes as they walked upstairs. He told them all to close their eyes or look away as they passed by the body. They sat on the lawn as they waited for the authorities to arrive. Once he heard the sirens getting closer, Izuku slipped on his mask, but waited still, surrounded by the kids. Shoyuta didn't know how to feel about the whole situation. Everything happened so fast he doesn't know what to think either. He saw new sides to Nightwalker, Midoriya. He didn't think the kid was capable of comforting anyone or really didn't want to. But what he saw today said something completely different. Shoyuta saw Sakachi's car pull up to the scene, and he hurriedly got out. He rushed up to the hero, utterly confused about the whole thing. But Shoyuta just pointed to the vigilante. The detective walked over to the bunch of kids. "You must be Suki?" Midoriya asked. Sakachi looked at Shoyuta, but the hero just shrugged. The vigilante explained everything and then just started naming off the kids and how long they've been missing for. The detective walked back over to the hero and kind of just gave him a rundown and took his account of the events. "That's him. Izuku Midoriya, the dead kid." Saw his face and confirmed it by him reacting to his name. They talked as they watched Midoriya say bye to every kid as they were checked out by a paramedic, then loaded into the back of police cars. Then suddenly he was just gone. Shoyuta didn't know how to feel about the events that took place today, but one thing he did know was that the kid was a hero whether he believed it or not. He saved lives today. Katsuki looked at the time. He should probably get going. He closed the sign language book and stood up from his desk. He shrugged on his uniform jacket, then threw the tie around his neck. Katsuki watched himself in the mirror as he tightened it. It felt like he couldn't breathe, so he loosened it a little, but even then it still felt like it was suffocating him, so he loosened it further. He kept doing it until he felt comfortable, but at that point the tie was closer to his stomach than his neck. He looked stupid. Katsuki angrily ripped it off his neck and threw it across the room. He stomped over to his bag and packed the book sitting on his desk, then grabbing the tie and shoving it in before zipping it up. He then stomped over to his nightstand. Looking down at the orange pair of hearing aids laying on the table, he hesitated before scooping them up and popping them in his ears, adjusting them so they sat comfortably. He then slowly turned them up. Only then did he begin to hear his mom stomping toward his room before bursting in. "You just put them in?" she yelled. His hands were still up to his ears. "What?" he yelled back. She quieted down to a more normal volume for her, which was still considerably loud. "I came to see if you were ready." He grabbed his bag and pushed his way past his mom to the stairs. Descending them, he was met with his father, sitting on the couch with a book sitting on his lap as he flailed his hands in the air. It looked like the same book Katsuki was just reading upstairs. Once he saw his son, he closed the book and placed it on the coffee table in front of him as he stood up. Katsuki crossed the living room to the front door. Slipping on his shoes, he turned around to his parents, just standing watching him. Once he leaves, he isn't going to see them for a while due to students being required to stay in the dorms. A rule put in place with the new student dorms to help them focus on their studies and give them a better environment to train. He didn't move, just stared at them, not knowing what to do or say. His mom slowly scooted toward him before just walking up and throwing her arms around him, his dad following suit. Katsuki didn't move at first as they hugged him from both sides with him stuck in the middle of them, but then slowly leaned into his mom. As they pulled away, Mitsuki grabbed his cheek and smacked his head. "Go get him, Brad," she said as he was pushed out the door. Katsuki approached the giant arch, staring up at it as he passed underneath it. He entered the building and walked down the hall toward his class, repeating one aim over and over to himself as he passed each door until reaching his. He craned his neck as he looked at the giant door that was his classroom. Peeking in, no one was there yet. He hesitated. "I'm supposed to be here. I'm in the right spot." He walked in and sat down in the second row as close to the windows as possible. Pulling out his phone, he scrolled through the news from the past few weeks as he got comfortable and propped his feet up on the desk. Scrolling past article after article about heroes being killed and the possibility of another, or even worse stain, he then got to stuff on the vigilantes. He opened one that caught his eye and started reading through it. Authorities arrived to find the body of Tucker Show, responsible for the kidnapping of roughly a dozen children over the years. Upon arrival, the vigilante, known by the name the Emerald Nightwalker, was seen, surrounded by the children rescued from Show's basement. What was his involvement in this case? Is he possibly a victim? He appeared rather close to the children and reportedly said a goodbye to each and every one of them before they were escorted away in a police vehicle. Had slipped away without the notice of anyone and was gone before reporters could question the vigilante. Students began trickling into the room and finding a seat. A boy with glasses and engines coming out of his pants walked in and locked eyes with Katsuki, but he just went back to reading his phone. Engine Legs carefully placed his stuff next to a desk, then stomped over in his direction. He chopped the air as he shouted. Katsuki adjusted the volume of his hearing aids and continued reading the news article, unaware that it was directed at him, until he started seeing hands right in front of his face blocking his phone. He looked up from his phone more confused than angry on why he was yelling at him. "You uncivilized cretin. How can you just put your feet up on the desk as if you were some hooligan? Where's your tie?" Katsuki was bombarded by the barrage of comments and insults as he slowly turned up his hearing aids. Then he got angry. Who the F was this guy to call him AF cretin? He put his feet down but never stood, just glared up at him. "Who the F are you?" Katsuki snarled. Glasses gasped and seemed taken aback. "Such language," he exclaimed. "I'll have you know my name is Tenya Ida. Why should I give a shit? Get the F away from me." Katsuki clenched his fists in front of him, ready to push the guy away. He didn't want to admit it, but this kid was too close, and it was making him really uncomfortable. Engines continued lecturing him on his use of language and lack of proper behavior, chopping the air and getting ever so close to his face. Katsuki shot up from his seat, yelling and swearing for him to back off. His palms popped ever so slightly as he was beginning to get more on edge, on the verge of just shoving his hands in his face and letting his quirk off on him. From behind glasses, a hand squeezed his shoulder. He whirled around to give whoever it was his attention, but he instantly furrowed his brows. A kid with messy purple hair and a shit-eating grin on his face removed his hand from his shoulder. "Still giving people shit, I see. Stick still up your ass?" Engine Legs started chopping the air. "Excuse me, what do?" His eyes glazed over as he dropped his arms. "Go sit down in your seat. Stop bothering people." Purple Hair stepped out of the way before Glass's shoulder checked him as he began walking toward his desk. He walked past a confused Katsuki and placed his bag next to the desk behind him. He looked at his confused state, then at Glasses now sitting at his desk staring at the front. Then he noticed the hearing aids and brought up his hands. "Shinso," he said, signing out the letters as well. "I can still hear," he snapped. It's going fast, but it was still there. He didn't need anyone looking down on him on the first day. Shinso scowled as he dropped his hands. "F you too, I guess. Just trying to be nice." He turned away and walked up to a boy in the back with bicolored hair. Shit, Katsuki thought. That wasn't what he wanted. He really needs to work on this whole being an asshole to genuinely nice people. The classroom was filled with students. Some in seats, others conversing with each other in different spots around the room. The door slammed open, and some sort of giant yellow caterpillar inched into the room. The Shinso kid rushed to his seat while everyone else just stared extremely confused. Slowly, the caterpillar stood up, and the front of it opened, revealing a disheveled homeless man as he stepped out of it. Katsuki had no clue who he was, but just assumed he was some unheard-of pro. It took 17 seconds before everyone shut up. Time is precious. If you were a rational set, then you would know that. We'll need to work on it. He walked to the front of the room, dragging the yellow suit behind him. I'm Shoyuta Aizawa, your teacher. He reached into his sleeping bag. Katsuki couldn't really tell what it was. Aizawa reached into the sleeping bag and pulled out a few blue outfits. Let's not waste any more time. Put these on and head outside. Katsuki walked out of the locker room to a small group of students standing in front of Aizawa. The rest were making their way out in waves, until eventually everyone was gathered in front of the hero. A girl with brown short hair raised her hand. Everyone turned toward her as she was called upon. Sir, we're going to miss orientation. Aizawa pulled out his phone and seemed to be scrolling through something. Yes. Instead, we're going to do something more useful with our time. Quirk assessments, he said as he held out his phone to the class, showing the different physical activities. A few of the students seemed to start getting visibly anxious. Here at UA, we're not tied to tradition. Us teachers can run our classes however we see fit. He pulled out a baseball and tossed it to Katsuki. Bakugas stepped into the circle. Katsuki juggled the ball in his hands as he walked to the big white circle behind the hero. Your whole lives you've been tested, but never with your quirks. One day society is going to realize that none of us are created equal and come to acknowledge that some hold more power than others. He turned toward Katsuki. What was your distance in middle school? 67 meters, I think. See how far you can throw it now with your quirk. Just stay in the circle. Katsuki pulled his arm back as his palms slowly heated up. Die! He yelled as he threw the ball with a great explosion behind it. A few students flinching or letting out a small yelp. All of you need to know your limits in order to see your potential. Without potential, you're a hazard to the profession. The ball hit the ground in the distance, and Aizawa held out his phone. 705, 2 meters. Whoa! 705, that's crazy. That looks fun. I want to go next. Oh yeah, getting to use our quirks as much as we want. Aizawa's scarf slowly began floating up and around him as he gave the class a stern look. Looks fun, huh? Think it's going to be all games and playtime, signing autographs and getting rich. He glared through everyone. Idiots, he yelled. As expected, some of you are here for the fame and fortune that comes with the job. That is but a fraction of what it is to be a hero. You have 3 years to work as hard as possible to even remotely come close to being called anything, whether that be a hero or not. Feeling unable to run or even move, the entire class visibly shook as the wrath of their new teacher stared them down. Let me warn you now and make one thing clear. If that's all you're here for, you can leave now. It's not worth lives to pay for your greed. The scarf dropped from around him, and the air suddenly became easier to breathe. Moving on, today you will be competing in different physical tests to gauge your potential. Whoever comes in last has none and has no place in my class, and will be expelled on the spot. Good luck, Aizawa said with a smirk at the end. Whether it was from his speech or threat of expulsion, a wave of anxiety washed over everyone. For most, it suddenly felt all too real, and it felt scary. For others, it felt like there was finally an end in sight, instead of this dream with the finish line far ahead. Katsuki smiled. He was worried he'll never be as great as the best, and afraid he won't live up to the hero Izuka would have been, but he's ready. He was going to finish this race, whether it was first place or dead last. He will be a hero to others. Students performed test after test, pushing their quirks to their utmost limits. Katsuki watched as the bicolored hair, Todoroki he learned, exceeded in everything without much worry. In the past, he probably would have been pissed that this kid was almost better than him. Katsuki had to admit, though, the dude had great control over his ice quirk. The other classmate he watched intensely was the purple-haired stick Shinso. He failed almost everything. Anything that a quirk couldn't help with, like the sit-ups and toe touches, he did all right. But he never used a quirk, so everyone passed him in most of the tests. So when the results were revealed and everyone viewed their scores, Katsuki wasn't surprised to see Shinso at the very bottom. He himself was second only because engine legs beat him in the race, making him lose points and fall behind Candy Cane Hair. It definitely pissed him off, but it felt like he was given a new goal. Everyone turned toward the tall stick just standing in the back. Some of his messy hair stuck to his sweaty forehead, looking like he didn't have a care in the world with his hands in his pockets. Aizawa announced his little ploy as he smiled. Now, go get changed and ready for your other classes. I'll see you all at the dorm later tonight. Hitoshi walked beside Shoto as they followed behind the class to their assigned dorm building. How was the first day? Hitoshi asked. Shoto gave a shrug. What I imagined, but with cold soba. A small smile crossed his mouth with a gleam in his eye. What about you? It was all right. It was kind of weird with Shoyuta and I acting like we didn't know each other. Shoto had briefly met the hero when he'd picked them both up one day after hanging out. It came as a great shock to him when he found out. They were indeed not related, at least as far as both of them know. I wish I could act like I didn't know my dad, Shoto quipped. They all pushed through the front doors of the entrance before dispersing. Some walked around the lobby, others perused the kitchen. The rest, like Hitoshi and Shoto, went to find their rooms. They got to the top floor right after Bakugu and watched as he entered the first room along the hall. The both of them walked a little ways down, skipping the second room and standing in front of the third and fourth room. I'm going to unpack. We'll meet up later when Shoyuta calls us down to discuss rules. Shoto nodded and entered his room. Hitoshi pushed through his door to the plain-looking room and the few boxes of his stuff sitting in the middle. He started with the box with his bedding. He wrestled around with the sheets, trying to find corners and getting them to stay on the bed. Eventually, the comforter and pillows were tossed on, and the bed was made. He unpacked more boxes, which were either clothes which he put in the dresser or the few decorative items he placed on his desk. He eventually reached the box with his scarf, which he pulled out and dropped onto his bed. Hitoshi stepped back and looked at the less plain-looking room. Checking the time, he realized it was about time to head down to the lobby, which was confirmed by the knock on his door. He opened the door to Shoyuta. Unpacked? Shoyuta asked as he stepped into the room, glancing at the sprawled-out scarf laying on the bed. Just about. How was your first day? He asked as he leaned against the door frame. Hitoshi shrugged. It was all right. It was both what I imagined, but then nothing like I imagined. You were a lot nicer than I was expecting. Huh, that was nice. Hitoshi moved toward the boxes and started breaking them down. I don't know. The image you cooked up for the first day was a lot more intense than the reality. I just wanted to give you fair warning, so it wasn't so much of a shock. Definitely scared the shit out of everyone else. You know, it totally did. Everyone went white when that scoreboard went up. Both of them laughed. I thought at least one would be gone already. I'm just as surprised. There's always one. Though that Mineta kid, the one with the grapes on his head, he's walking on thin ice. Shoyuta checked his watch and sat up from the door frame. All right, get your buddy next door and start heading downstairs. I gotta start gathering the flock. Shoyuta walked out and down the hall. He knocked on Bakuga's door as he passed it and yelled, Downstairs 2 minutes. Hitoshi walked next door to Shoto's room. The door opened just as he was about to knock. The two walked downstairs and took a seat on the couch. About a minute later, the rest of the class was gathered in the common room, Shoyuta standing in front of everyone. Shoyuta explained the rules and regulations. When quiet hours and lights out are. When and were they allowed on campus during what hours and weekends. Everyone sat or stood quietly listening. Lastly, anyone allergic to cats? Shoyuta asked as he made his way toward his room. Everyone looked at each other confused. After seeing no one raise their hands or nod their heads, Shoyuta opened the door to his room and Hope walked out. With both of them staying mostly or almost completely on campus, they couldn't leave the cat at home alone. Some of the girls squealed with excitement at the sight of the animal, but Shoyuta wasn't done talking. He walked back over, the cat following right next to him. Hope spotted Hitoshi and cut in front of Shoyuta as she ran toward him. Half the class leaned toward the cat, now curled up in Hitoshi's lap, commenting on how much she seemed to like him or how his quirk must have something to do with animals. Shoyuta cleared his throat to bring everyone's attention back to him. As you can see, my room is right there. Any trouble, I'm right there. There better not be any trouble. That's it. You're free to disperse, he said as he shooed them away with a hand. Some gathered around Hitoshi and the cat, mostly the girls. As they took turns petting the cat, they began discussing among themselves. Momo stood up and the class looked at her. The girls were talking. As a way to get to know each other, we do a room presentation contest. It garnered enthusiasm. Then everyone was off already walking up the stairs to the first floor of rooms. Hitoshi got up and followed behind everyone, and Hope was right next to him. The class went room to room commenting on how cool, or pink, or normal looking it was. Everyone skipped Minetta's room after seeing how enthusiastically inviting he was, especially toward the girls. No one noticed that Bakugo wasn't with them until they got to his room and were looking for him in the crowd of students to open his door. After knocking a few times, the fiery blonde eventually answered with an irritated "What?" "We're looking at each other's rooms as a way to get to know each other better," Mina cheerily said. "No," Bakugo said with no hesitation. Come on, just a peek," Uruwaka chimed in. The blonde seemed to ponder as he sat in silence, while half the class was begging for him to let them see. Bakugo looked to get more and more angry the more they begged. He yelled before stepping to the side and swinging the door open. He didn't let anyone enter, though, and popped little explosions in his hands at anyone that crossed the door frame. It looked relatively plain and boring, sort of like Hitoshi's, except for a couple of pictures. Sitting on the shelf behind the head of his bed, next to the digital clock and a few books, was a picture frame with a very familiar set of green curls. The class started moving on to the next room, but Hitoshi didn't move, just stared at the picture in the back of the room. He couldn't really see the kid's face, but he could tell one was probably Bakugo, who was standing next to a kid that looked a lot like a smaller version of him. "Izuku," Hitoshi whispered under his breath. Bakugo seemed to catch what he said, whether he actually heard it or not, because his eyes shot open. They both looked at each other like they wanted to ask something. Looks of concern, anger, then confusion and curiosity crossed their faces. "Shinso," one of the girls called from down the hall. The whole class was gathered in front of his room, waiting for him to open the door. Hitoshi took one last look at the picture, then Bakugo, before joining back up with the class and opening his door. He didn't say anything but stood so no one could go too far in. "Hey, isn't that Mr. Aizawa's scarf?" Kaminari commented. Everyone looked toward the bed to see the scarf sitting on his bed, and Hope now curled up in the middle of it. He rubbed the back of his neck. "No, it's mine." Everyone was waiting for him to say more, but when he didn't, they started asking how to get one themselves, or saying how cool it is, before they all moved on to the last room, Shoto's. After seeing his room and commenting on how traditional it looked, that concluded the presentation of the rooms. Everyone dispersed without really coming up with who had the best. Then off to bed they went. Hitoshi said goodnight to Shoto, saying he'd see him tomorrow morning, before stepping into his room and getting ready for bed. He gathered the scarf from his bed, careful not to pick up the cat with it, and wrapped it around the back of his desk chair. He shot Shoyuta a text letting him know Hope's with him, before he scooted her over and crawled into bed. For the first time in a while he passed out, but his dreams were far from peaceful. The start of something cruel. He got blood on his suit again. Izuku was sitting in one of the chairs in his usual dry cleaners. It was run by an older woman who didn't ask questions, but he still told her that he volunteered at a hospital in his free time. Izuku was flipping through a book about anatomy. It was quite informative in showing him where the arteries are in the human body and how long it can take for each bone to heal, if broken or bruised. His phone buzzed as he read about the difference between an artery and capillary. "Eraser, you coming out tonight?" "Izuku, I'm gay." Ever since the Tucker incident, he and Eraser would text from time to time. It really wasn't a lot, because quite frankly both felt no need to talk to the other. Half the time it was just Izuku asking the hero random stupid questions. If Eraser asked him anything personal, it wasn't answered seriously, or it just wasn't answered at all. Then every now and again the hero would just inform him that he wasn't going out that night because of school. Izuku didn't really care either way, but sometimes he wouldn't rush to get out there as fast. "Eraser, you know that's not what I meant. Totally fine if you are." "Izuku, thanks. Are you asking because you have no friends and need someone to hang out with?" "Eraser, what are you talking about?" "And we both know I do. I've shown you pictures." "Izuku, one picture of you and present Mike is not much proof." The old woman walked up to the counter with his clothes wrapped in plastic. "All done, honey." Izuku tucked his book underneath his arm as he walked up to the counter. He paid and yelled as he walked out, "Thanks again. I'll probably be back soon." Eraser. Yes or no? He was already planning on going out tonight to test out how easy it is to break someone's arm, but Izuku didn't like how persistent he was about it. Maybe he'll just try and avoid him. Izuku, why does it matter to you? Eraser. I only have one jelly pouch left. I gotta know if I have to buy more before going out. Izuku. Mix it up. Get something different than usual. It's starting to gross me out. Eraser. Fine. I'm assuming that's a yes to going out tonight. Izuku. No. Izuku slipped his phone into his pants pocket and ignored any other text from the hero. He pulled open the door to the storage container and walked to the back to hang his freshly cleaned suits up. It was still way too bright to go out just yet, so he made use of his time and worked. Taking the voice changer out of his Reaper mask, he made a few calls to some low-lives willing to terrorize some high schoolers. Until it was eventually too dark to see, Izuku put the piece back in his mask and slipped on his vigilante outfit, ready to break some bones. Shoyuta adjusted his earpiece as he bounced around on the rooftops on a mission to find Nightwalker, but got continuously sidetracked with every scream and scuffle he heard. The kid said he wasn't coming out tonight, but as blunt as he can be, it isn't unlike him to lie for the fun of it. Shoyuta continued his search when he heard a cry for help. Hopping a few buildings over, he's pretty sure he heard something snap, which was followed by another scream and plead for help. He peered down into the alleyway to a kid sitting on top of a middle-aged man. Nightwalker? The kid held one of the guy's hands, then held on to one of his fingers. Now, in my hand is one of your phalanges. He twisted and bent the finger until it snapped. The guy on the ground yelped out in pain. Definitely Nightwalker. Shoyuta shot out his capture weapon, wrapping around the vigilante's stomach and pulling him off the man. Kid, what are you doing? The vigilante looked like a dead body in water as he lifelessly hung from the scarf against the side of the building. Showing him the different bones in his body, he innocently said, speaking to the ground. Shoyuta slowly lowered him. Why? Nightwalker looked at the man still laying on the ground, riddled with very obvious broken bones. Because sexually assaulting someone is bad, and he needs to learn. As he got closer to the ground, Shoyuta just placed his limp body on the ground and pulled away his capture weapon. Hopping down, the vigilante just laid, face against concrete, staring at the hero. Sup, Eraserhead. How's your night? Shoyuta shrugged. Spent half of it searching for you. Shoyuta sent out a few texts to a couple of people. The vigilante got up right away and started climbing the nearest fire escape. Where's the victim? Ran away a while ago, he said, right as he reached the roof. The hero climbed up a few minutes later, but the kid was already a couple buildings over, just standing in the middle of the roof concentrating on something in the distance. Shoyuta made his way over to him. Midoriya, don't call me that. The vigilante immediately snapped, looking at the hero for a second, but focusing back on what he was doing. Izuku? Shoyuta hesitantly asked, seeming to test the waters with the name. When there was no response, he figured it was okay to use. What are you doing now? The hero asked. Izuku started moving around the edge and peering over the side, then just looking out into the distance. Nothing, don't worry about it. Eventually, the kid seemed to calm down and sat on one of the edges. He held out a hand to the hero, gesturing for him to give it to him. Come on now, let's try this new flavor. Shoyuta handed him a jelly pouch before taking a seat right next to him. So, how's it hanging, Erasers? He asked, as he slurped from the jelly pouch and started swinging his legs. School's back in session. So I've heard. Kick anyone out yet? Surprisingly, no, but I'm getting pretty close with this one kid. Shoyuta turned to his side and sent out a text. Who are you texting now? Izuku asked, seeming to look around the area again, but never in his direction. Making sure the cat is fed. Shoyuta said, then quickly put his phone away. A cat hub. Izuku seemed to be zoning out or focusing on something in the distance again. Shoyuta couldn't exactly tell. Is that surprising? Not in the slightest. Then what? The kid has been off since meeting him tonight. Has he picked up on the fact that he's been lying to him? Nothing. The kid started getting up. He's definitely picked up on something. Hey, hold up. I wanted to ask you something. Shoyuta got up after him as he just started walking a few feet from the edge. Join my class, he blurted out. Izuku stopped mid-step. You know who I am now, so you should know why I can't. He looked at the hero like he was stupid. No, Quirk. Then continued walking along the brink of the building. If that mattered, I wouldn't be asking. The hero was inching closer to him. Not everyone is as progressive as you. Then prove everyone wrong. Don't feel like it. Izuku started balancing on the ledge of the roof as he continued to walk. You're going to fall? Shoyuta was hesitantly reaching out, but was still pretty far back to be able to do anything. You must really want me to join that class of yours, Izuku said as he balanced on one leg. Yes, I do. Izuku paused and jumped down from the ledge. I'm not joining your class. Why? Izuku didn't answer, just walked past the hero. Shoyuta grabbed his wrist, but the vigilante ripped it out of his grasp. Kid, wait. The hero chased after him. No, Izuku was getting ready to jump to the next building over. Can you just answer me why? Izuku turned to face the hero and walked right up to him, pressing his finger into his chest. Forget about it. Give up. I already did. Izuku yelled. I'm not giving up on you. Izuku started walking away, but turned back before Shoyuta could say anything more. I don't want to join your stupid F class. I can't be a hero. I don't even want to be a F hero. He shouted at him. Kids, no. I do not care. I'm not interested. Izuku was backing up closer to the edge. Shoyuta was reaching out to him as he was inching too close to the ledge. Izuku, he said, worried he might step off the side of the building. Give it up. Izuku yelled, his voice breaking. Give it up. Give it the F up. I did, so why can't you? Tears ran down his face as he screamed at the hero. Just give. Izuku suddenly stopped, his eyes widened. Then they turned angry in a split second. I knew something was up. Izuku's voice sounded broken as tears ran down his face. How could you? Shoyuta was confused when his earpiece buzzed to life with voices. Team 1. Ground team is in position. Tsukachi said. Team 2. Sky team is in position. Izuku took off and jumped to the next building over as Shoyuta yelled for him to wait. But just as the vigilante landed on the other roof, another hero was already up there waiting and was quick to catch him. He struggled, but not enough before a syringe was inserted into his neck. He stared at Shoyuta, who was still frozen on the other rooftop as the needle poked his neck. Izuku pulled out one of his knives and stabbed her in the thigh. As the hero yelped in pain, he elbowed her in the stomach, then threw his palm up and into her chin. He broke free, taking the knife with him. Gaining distance from the hero, he removed the syringe from his neck and threw it at her. It planted itself in the side of her face before she could dodge it. He wobbled his way over to the edge and fell over. Shoyuta yelled as he jumped over and threw out his scarf but caught nothing. Frantically peering over the side to a dumpster down below, relief washed over him, but he didn't see the kid. Ground team? You see him? No. Izuku looked at Eraserhead straight in the eyes as the syringe stabbed his neck. Traitor. Izuku stabbed the hero and broke free. He struggled to put the blade away as he could feel whatever they gave him start setting in. It was some sort of drug or sedative of some type. He remembered seeing a dumpster on the side of this building. Wobbling over to the edge, he fell without even looking down. Landing in the full dumpster, his fall was for the most part cushioned, but something felt like it embedded itself into the side of his leg. Izuku buried himself underneath the trash and fought to stay awake. Ground team? You see him? He heard Eraserhead yell. People ran by the dumpster. Then the hero and everyone else was gone. As quietly as possible, he moved the trash off of him. Izuku climbed out of the garbage and started limping away as fast as he could. Izuku ran a few blocks in the opposite direction from them before climbing the nearest fire escape, peeking over the edge of the building for any heroes on the roofs before climbing up and over. He sprinted as fast as he could, throwing himself to the next roof over, tucking and rolling. He did it again to the next roof, then again. He was feeling lightheaded and could feel the sedative taking its final hold of him. Almost there. Izuku threw himself to the next roof, tuck and rolled, then limped to the other edge. He threw himself but tripped and landed in the dumpster below. He climbed out and fell to the ground. The sedative finally consumed him. Hey dude, you okay? He LP. The familiar scarred face stood over him just as he closed his eyes. Zoom! Whoosh! Izuku whispered as he held the all-might figure high above his head. His little legs moved as fast as they could around the room as he flew the hero through the fake sky. He would quietly land the figure on the floor and pretend to fight off make-believe villains, trying to make as little noise as possible. Izuku was much too short to block the TV, but that didn't stop him from trying to remain out of his line of sight. He gripped the plastic hero as he made it jump high into the air. Izuku quietly ran around the side of the room, staring at the toy in his hand. Focused on racing toward the fake villains, Izuku's foot clipped the leg of the small table sitting next to the couch. All Might went flying as Izuku tripped and lost his grip. Ignoring the pain in his foot, he quickly turned toward the wobbling table. Izuku held onto one of the legs as it slowly stabilized. Nonetheless, the mahogany-framed picture sitting on top toppled over the side and shattered on impact. A few of the glass pieces embedded themselves in his legs and arms, but Izuku couldn't worry about them right now. He immediately started trying to gather the glass shards into a pile, cutting the palms and sides of his hands. Maybe he didn't notice. Maybe it wasn't that loud, Izuku thought. His heart felt like it was going to beat out of his chest. The familiar sound of a glass cup was placed down as he heard him get up from the couch. Izuku stared at the ground, terrified to look anywhere but down. Panic was setting in as Izuku tried not to move as the feet entered his vision. "Izuku," came the deep, quiet voice of his father from above him. It rattled his small body, but Izuku remained still. "Apologies, and I didn't mean to," pour it out of his mouth faster than he could think. "Izuku, look at me." Tears were streaming down his face as he slowly looked up at the face of his father. His heart stopped as he made eye contact. Izuku shook his head as he choked on his tears. "I didn't mean to," he cried out. Hisashi's foot pressed into his chest as he pushed him back and peered down at the picture now covered in shattered glass. Inko in a white dress and Hisashi in a suit leaned on each other as they held their left hands out and smiled at the camera. A time when there was no Izuku. A time when they were both happy. Izuku hesitantly shuffled back, but barely made it 2 centimeters when a foot connected with his stomach and sent him flying across the room. He wheezed as he tried pulling himself along the floor and desperately trying to get away. Another foot kicked him in the gut and sent him farther across the room, hitting the shelf in the corner. Izuku's insides churned, and he tried to keep it down, but in vain as the day's breakfast came rushing up and all over the floor. He held his stomach and curled into a ball, cornered against the shelf. Hisashi, seemingly calm, made his way over to him, speaking of how worthless he was. "You know, so many people would be so much happier if you didn't exist. I knew it was a mistake keeping you." He stood over the small curled-up body of Izuku and just yelled. A stream of flames shooting from his mouth and burning the side of Izuku. Izuku yelped and screamed in pain. "Mommy!" Izuku cried out. Izuku shot awake screaming. He frantically looked around at the unfamiliar environment before making eye contact with Dabi on the floor, chair fallen over next to him. Dabi shot up with his hands out trying to reassure and calm him down. "Whoa, dude. Calm down, you're safe." Izuku looked at Dabi and instantly settled down. His head hit the pillow as he laid back and tried to calm his racing heart. After a couple minutes of just sitting there, Izuku looked down at his leg when he realized the pain wasn't going away. "I pulled the glass out and cauterized the wound." Dabi grabbed a cold, wet towel from a bowl sitting on the floor. "I figured you didn't want to go to a hospital." He wrapped the towel around his leg over the burned skin. Izuku sat up to hold the towel down when a stray curl tickled the top of his cheek. He frantically reached at his face, but his mask was still sitting in place. "I didn't look, didn't even peek. People wear masks for a reason, and I wasn't about to determine why." "Your hat fell off, though," Dabi said, as he pointed to the beanie sitting atop the small table next to the bed. "How long have I been out?" Izuku asked as he reached for the first aid kit. Dabi picked it up from the floor and placed it next to him on the bed. "Little less than an hour." Izuku dug through the box and pulled out a roll of bandages, the small container of petroleum jelly, and a tube of burn cream. Dabi cleared his throat and pointed toward the door. "Now that you're up, I gotta get back to work. Want anything to drink?" "Tea," Izuku said without hesitation, sounding excited. Dabi paused, which made him remember he wasn't here as Reaper. He messed with the towel on his leg, trying not to look up at him. Dobby chuckled. "You're in luck. Got a regular that loves the tea I brew." That was an understatement. Izuku thought the heaven he brewed was what it felt like to be laying on the clouds. "Any kind in particular?" "Anything's fine." Dobby nodded before he walked out, closing the door behind him. Izuku pulled his mask off right as the door clicked shut. He breathed in the unobstructed air as he wiped the sweat from around his mouth. He got to work on his leg, pulling the towel off and applying the burn cream. He rubbed it and then scooped out a good amount of the petroleum jelly and covered the entire burned area. After wiping his hands off on the side of the bed, he grabbed the bandages and wrapped his leg. There was a knock at the door right as he finished. Reaching for his mask, he beckoned for Dobby to enter as he put it on. Dobby put the steaming cup down on the side table next to his beanie. "Stay as long as you need. I'll be downstairs." "Thank you." Dobby stopped right before the door closed and just nodded back at him. Izuku took his mask off and scooted to the edge of the bed. He placed his feet on the ground and slowly got up, wincing at the initial pressure on his burned leg. Picking up the cup, Izuku blew on the tea before taking a sip, then another, then just chugging the rest. Izuku put his mask back on, grabbed his beanie, and slipped out the front entrance of the bar. Once he was a few blocks away, he took off his mask. Walking back, he peeked around every corner and continuously kept looking over his back, making sure no one was following him. The whole walk he thought about how he should probably relocate, or at least store his villain stuff somewhere else, considering the heroes already know one of his identities. It's safe to assume it wouldn't be good if they knew the other. He got back to his home, what felt like hours later, and face-planted into his bed pile, passing out mere seconds later. Izuku woke up right as the sun was rising, a whole day later. He unburied himself and dragged himself to the door. Pushing it open, the sun bled into the storage container. Izuku yawned and scratched at his stomach as he stared off, debating on what he was going to do today. He shrugged his shoulders and got changed out of his vigilante outfit before heading for the beach. There wasn't much left, so Izuku dove right into it the minute he arrived. He picked up an old TV and started carrying it to the street. All the piles he had created the past few weeks had been mysteriously picked up again, so the edge of the beach was clean once more. Placing the TV down, Izuku started his first pile of the day. He went back and forth pushing and pulling the garbage, most of which were old or broken appliances. Izuku got behind what looked like a washing machine and started pushing, but it didn't budge. He pushed again with as much strength as he could muster, but still nothing. It wasn't moving. Too weak as always. Then prove everyone wrong. Eraser's words crossed his mind. Izuku closed his eyes as he placed his hands on the side of the machine, then took a deep breath. He pushed with his entire body and more as he dug his heels into the sand. Izuku pushed and pushed until eventually he opened his eyes and he was a few feet away from where he started. He cocked a smile, amazed at his small accomplishment. "I'm not giving up on you." Izuku kicked the side of the machine. Can't believe he's reminiscing the words of a traitor. He kicked the machine again. Oh yeah, he was betrayed. Izuku kicked it again, then again and again. Izuku screamed as he slumped down onto his knees, tears pouring out of his eyes. "I thought you were my friend." He trusted him. Trusted him. Traitor. Izuku pulled at his ears and the hair on the side of his head as he screamed and broke down. "I lost another one." He gripped his shirt against his chest, his knuckles turning white. "It hurts," Izuku cried. "It hurts." Izuku adjusted the flashlight in his mouth as he focused on the door lock in front of him. Sticking tools in and out, he prodded and poked the inside of the electrical box, tailoring it to be basically impenetrable and impossible to break into. It was one of those key code locks. Izuku was just adding a few more security measures to ensure no one was getting in. The only way anyone was entering besides him would be if they broke the door down, but that would be loud and at least alert someone. Izuku had found a relatively small studio apartment. It was simple and exactly the space he needed to store his Reaper stuff, just in case he accidentally leads anyone back to the storage container. The room felt a little bigger than the storage container he was living in, but maybe that's just because of the one window. It only had a bathroom and a few kitchen appliances, and he wasn't looking to furnish it any further. On the off chance someone does break in while he's away, the place will probably appear robbed already, Maybe it'll discourage them from stealing the few things he has here. The place looked barren save for the one wall with the string of suits. Sitting on the tiny counter next to the sink, his mask lay atop a couple of notebooks. The apartment was now a place to store any important stuff as well. He could have just rented out a storage unit or something like that, but there's always too many cameras. At least now he has an extra living space if something ever happens to the container. Izuku finished up with the lock and clicked the flashlight off. He put his tools away, then changed out of his sweatpants into a nicer outfit. He grabbed one of his caps and his mask before climbing out the window onto the fire escape. He made his way to the bar to get himself a good cup of tea. Sick days? Are you being serious right now? Izuku yelled into the phone. Dabi and Twice looked at each other and could just tell the other side of the line was silent. It's one day. It's going to be one day. Show up at the assigned location or don't get paid. Izuku hung up the phone. Dumbass. Dabi quickly looked busy cleaning a cup as Izuku spun around in his chair. Twice was staring off into the distance, biting the tip of the bendy straw from his drink. Izuku looked at the both of them and chuckled, breaking the awkward silence between the three of them. So, anything crazy happened recently? Izuku asked. Twice spit out his straw and shot up. I'm a father. What? Dabi and Izuku shouted. I will cherish them forever. One bit my finger. How many are there? Dabi asked, more confused than anything. 5. The 6th didn't make it. There were 6. Dabi carefully put down the glass he was cleaning on the bar counter before he dropped it. Is the mother okay? I gave Spam a bath after. She's softer than ever. Twice proudly stated. Wait, hold on. Izuku threw out a hand. Spam? As in the fat raccoon you found in the dumpster by your apartment a few weeks ago. Spam is the mother of my children. Color seemed to return to Dabi's face. His hands then lit up blue with a flame. You lead with that shit for brains. Dabi yelled at Twice. My brain is not shit. It's not my fault you're dumb. Twice yelled back. Me? Dumb? You think you're the father to a bunch of raccoons. I am. Twice yelled before quietly asking. I'm not. Hey, Izuku shouted before the two could continue. Izuku patted Twice's shoulder. I bet your kids are cute and fluffy. Izuku leveled Dabi with a stare. The flames extinguished as he let out a sigh. They are? Twice said, seeming to cheer up. You got any pictures? Dabi reluctantly asked. I do. Twice excitedly exclaimed as he pulled out Polaroid prints. They all went silent as they passed around the photos. Twice shuffled through them one last time before pocketing them. He took a sip from his drink. Living a boring life? Anything crazy happen? He asked Dabi. Yeah, actually, he said, seeming to suddenly remember something. Dabi looked at Izuku. I think that kid we helped fake his death is that green vigilante that's been running around. Twice seemed to flinch but didn't say anything, just took a never-ending sip from his drink. Izuku pulled down his mask over his mouth as he put the warm cup down. What makes you say that? I helped him out the other day. The top of his face, the part that wasn't covered by his mask, seemed familiar to me. I realized after he left that he reminded me of the kid we helped out. His eyes and hair looked almost identical. They have the exact same measurements. They could be related. Twice blurted out. Izuku leaned toward Twice, who tried to look everywhere, but at the smiling mask right next to him. How do you know that? Dabi asked as he crossed his arms and leaned on the bar counter. From videos and pictures that I come across. I measured the body. He subtly looked Izuku up and down as he measured the empty space in front of him with imaginary measuring tape. Izuku stared at him for a moment before leaning back and taking a long, drawn-out sip of his drink, seeming to ponder something. Izuku shrugged as he placed his cup down. No point hiding it now. He pulled his mask down as he leaned on the bar. The dead kid we helped is indeed the Emerald Nightwalker. Dabi leaned in further. Wait, you knew all this time? Izuku nodded. Of course I knew. He contacted me to fake kill him. Something seemed to click in Dabi's mind. Is that why he wanted to fake his death in the first place? To be a vigilante? What kind of reasoning is that? Izuku shook his head. No. He didn't exactly do it for that reason. Dabi leaned in closer, but Izuku sat back and crossed his arms. I can't tell you everything. There are some things I still have to keep secret for him. Client confidentiality. Dabi pushed himself up, disappointed. He grabbed Twice's cup and went to go refill it. Izuku peeked at Twice, who was watching Dabi fill his cup with more soda. He definitely knows something more than he's letting on. Twice then suddenly shot up. I have to go feed her. I have to go. Twice saluted Izuku. Captain. Izuku smirked as he gave him a 2-finger salute. Twice. He ran out the bar right as Dabi was returning with his newly full drink. Where's he going in such a rush? Forgot to feed his baby mama. Izuku started taking a sip of his tea when his phone rang. Pulling it out and sighing as he put it up to his ear, not even caring to turn away from the bar. He pushed his cup toward Dabi, who's not even trying to look like he isn't listening. Dabi refilled the cup and placed it closer to him, right as he hung up. Bunch of dumbass, the lot of them. Izuku looked at Dabi, who was very obviously curious. Hey, he said, getting serious with him. Dabi put down the cup he was cleaning, ready to hear all the drama happening. If a group calling themselves the League of Villains approaches you asking you to join them, decline them. No matter what they tell you or offer you, don't join them. If you need money, contact me. I'll set you up with something. It was quiet as the two stared at each other, Dabi looking confused and a little disappointed. Got it? Oh, yeah, I'm being serious. You're one of the good ones whether you realize it or not. It's not worth destroying that by joining a group just looking to destroy lives just so you can make a few extra bucks. I got it. I won't do it, Dabi said as he picked up another cup to clean. Izuku took a sip of his tea. He didn't want the League corrupting Dabi, especially when he has potential to follow in his brother's footsteps and become a hero or at least do some good. The bell rang, signaling everyone to get up and head to lunch. Hitoshi got up from his desk just as Shoto was walking up behind him. The two talked as they walked down the hall and continued to talk as they got their lunch and as they found a table, sitting down across from each other. I kind of wanted Yaroza to be president, not stick up the ass Ida. Shoto shrugged. I didn't really care who did what. Ida did at least remind us of the math test tomorrow. Hitoshi grumbled. I forgot about that. You want to study in mine or your room? Shoto shrugged. Doesn't matter to me. Your room it is, Hitoshi said, just as he was shoving a bite of food into his mouth. Kaminari walked over holding his tray of food. Would you guys mind if I sat with you? Shoto and Hitoshi looked at each other before just shrugging in unison. Hitoshi, still chewing, just gestured to the empty seats at the table. Kaminari placed his tray right next to Hitoshi's, causing him to choke for a second. He looked at all the empty seats, and then at the blonde who was smiling as he took a sip of his drink. So you guys studying for that math test later? Shoto nodded. We were planning on... Shiro dropped his tray right next to Kaminari's and copped a squat. Class was brutal today, and then there's that test tomorrow, Shiro complained. Dude, we were just talking about that. We're all going to study later. Kaminari responded. Oh, can I join? Shiro asked, looking at Hitoshi. Hey guys, Kirishima said before Hitoshi could even respond. Kirishima was dragging Bikugu behind him as he took the seat right next to Shoto, Ashido following right behind them and sitting next to the fiery blonde. Hitoshi made eye contact with Bikugu, both staring at each other for an awkward second before breaking it and taking a bite of their food. Hey, we're all thinking of studying for that math test later. Want to join? Shiro asked. I'm going to fail no matter how much I study. I just know it. Ashido cried. I want to join? Kirishima nudged Bikugu's shoulder. You coming too? Hell no. Bikugu yelled. Come on, bro. We could really use your help. Kirishima begged. I don't care. Come on, dude, Shiro pleaded. I saw some of your scores. You seem to at least know what you're doing. Hitoshi perked up at this. Maybe he could inadvertently learn from him if he helps out the others. It wasn't that Shoto didn't help when they studied together. He just couldn't understand it from him any better than he did in class. He didn't want to admit it, but maybe Bikugu was different. Yeah, Bikugu, you should join us. It could be fun. Hitoshi spoke up, causing the rest of the group to pester the blonde even more to come. All right, Bikugu yelled. I'll think about it. The group cheered even if it was just a maybe. They all continued to talk, laughing here and there as they ate their lunches. So you got some kind of cat whispering Quirk or something. Why is she always next to you? Kaminari asked. Hitoshi laughed. Yeah, just PS, and the nearest cats come flocking. I guess Hope is the only one nearby then. Shoto responded in his usual deadpan voice. Hitoshi didn't know if he was playing into his joke or if this was the start of another crazy theory. I guess so. Kaminari shrugged. The other half of the table was yelling about something in class and complaining about how hard the homework was. Were there reporters at the front of the school today? Shoto asked, considerably quieter than the rest of the group. There was press out front? Kaminari asked, shocked. Ashido pointed her chopsticks at Shoto as she quickly tried to finish chewing. I noticed them too. She yelled. Wonder what they're here for? Shiro asked. Probably got news that All Might's teaching here, Bakuga said before taking a bite of his food. There's always chaos that follows wherever that guy is, Hitoshi said, rolling his eyes. He's the #1 hero after all. Is that what it's going to be like for? Suddenly a piercing alarm started blaring, interrupting Kirishima. Bakuga instantly covered his ears and turned down his hearing aids. Warning, Level 3 security breach. All students please evacuate the building in an orderly fashion. I repeat. Everyone in the cafeteria began panicking and immediately rushing to the exit. Kaminari gripped the side of Hitoshi's shirt as everyone at the table stood and students ran past them. Hitoshi looked considerably calmer than the rest of the group, but his feet felt like they were frozen to the ground and his heart was going to beat out of his chest. What should I do? He looked at Kaminari frozen and shaking as he gripped his shirt and cupped his ear with the other hand. Hitoshi calmed his heart, knowing what he needed to do. No one move, he shouted, causing the group to freeze. There's no point going out into the halls, just yet they're going to be crowded and you're just going to be stuck with everyone else. Are you sure? Kirishima asked, worried and hesitating on whether he wanted to run with everyone else or stay. Bakuga remained agitated next to him, still holding his ears. Hitoshi's phone buzzed in his pocket. He quickly checked it, reading over the text. Shoyuta, don't move from lunchroom. Hitoshi looked back up at Kirishima, much calmer than before. 100% sure. Everyone stood at their seat, but ready to run at any moment. Kaminari was still shaking, holding both ears now as the alarm continued to go off. Hitoshi turned toward him and squatted on the ground. He looked up at Kaminari from the floor, the alarm seeming to get quieter as he focused on calming him down. He patted the side of Kaminari's leg. Hey, it's okay. It's going to be okay. Security breach means someone broke in, Kaminari said, voice quivering. Yes, but that doesn't mean it's a villain. Hell, it could have been one of those reporters really wanting that interview with All Might. But what if the heroes don't get there in time? Kaminari, what if she dies? I didn't mean... Kaminari, Hitoshi yelled. The blonde looked at him. He didn't want to do it, but knew it was the best way to calm him down and keep him from spiraling further. Can you answer me? Kaminari nodded. Hitoshi internally sighed at the lack of a verbal response, only feeling more guilty knowing what he's about to do by asking another question. Can you tell me what color my hair is? Purple. Kaminari's eyes glazed over as his arms went slack at his side. Calm down and breathe, Hitoshi commanded in a soft voice. The blonde started taking very large breaths, lifelessly inhaling and exhaling. Not just Kaminari seemed to be calming down, but the rest of the group as well, looking less tense. Hitoshi peered around the cafeteria at the small number of students that had also not rushed out with the rest. The few groups of students, looking like third years, stood at their tables calm but ready for anything. Eventually, the alarm finally ceased. Hitoshi knocked Kaminari out of the trance, worried about what he was going to say. Sorry for that, Kaminari said. Everyone reacts differently to things, you're fine. Sorry for using my quirk on you without asking first. You okay now? Hitoshi asked. I'm feeling a lot better. There was awkward silence between them. So, your quirk isn't cat whispering. Kaminari chuckled. Hitoshi smiled. No, it isn't. Kaminari smiled at him. Thank you. Anytime. Nisa came over the intercom system explaining that it was just a drill and for all students to head to their next class. Hitoshi picked up his tray and cleaned up his area, the rest of the group following suit. He suddenly started laughing, which garnered weird looks before the rest of them joined in as they picked up their trays off the table. They all started walking to their class. How much you want to bet Ida tried to control the crowd? Hitoshi asked. You're on, Bakuga said from in front of him. The whole group laughed as they mimicked his hand chops. They're the last ones to get back to the classroom, where the rest of the students are sitting in their seats chatting to each other. Shoyuta is standing at the front texting what looks like something important to someone, probably Nizu, about the situation. They sat down in their seats. Shoyuta looks at him and nods, and Hitoshi nods back. "All right," Shoyuta shouted. The room got instantly quiet. Every hero has to know how to act under pressure, especially unexpected situations like today. Izuku walked to the bar, slipping his mask on right before he entered. He climbed onto the stool as a steaming cup was pushed toward him. "How can you even stand drinking that?" The scratchy voice from beside him asked. "It just tastes like dirty brown water." Izuku sighed. He was tired of explaining why he liked tea over and over again. It isn't everyone's cup of tea, he knows that, but the adult child apparently didn't understand everyone has their own tastes. "So, did you do what I told you to?" Izuku asked in his most customer service voice. Shigaraki stared at the monitor at the end of the counter as he scratched his neck. Yeah, he grumbled. Using the reporters as a distraction was a great idea. Kurogiri piped up from behind the bar. "Shut up!" Shigaraki yelled as loud as his raspy voice could. "My idea would have worked just fine. Yet, mine ensured you had at least a window to get in and out without you or the spy being caught." Izuku said passive-aggressively. "Hell, I don't even know who this spy is, and yet I knew they'd probably do a better job of not screwing up the plan than you." Shigaraki spun around in his chair and reached for his mask, but Izuku swatted his hand away, causing the man-child to scream out of frustration. He got up and stomped into one of the rooms in the back and slammed the door behind him. Izuku clenched his fist and gritted his teeth. He felt like an irritated parent dealing with their pain in the ass. "Kid." The sound of Kurogiri refilling his cup helped calm him. Kurogiri was like an angel compared to Shigaraki. He was civilized, didn't act like a spoiled brat, enjoyed and brewed a good cup of tea, and to top it all off, dressed well. Izuku smiled at Kurogiri. "Thank you. This is nothing compared to what you're doing for us." "Thank you." Kurogiri picked up a glass and started cleaning it. "So, how much time do we have?" Izuku asked. "About a week from now. The trip is exactly where you said it'd be." Of course it was. Izuku had researched the ins and outs of the school when he was planning on attending. Now he just had more time, and on top of that, more skill and tools assisting him in digging a little deeper in his search for information. And he's definitely on the roster to depart at the same time as the other teacher. All Might will be attending the trip, Kurogiri confirmed. "Perfect. Nice job, Kurogiri," Izuku exclaimed. Kurogiri looked down and focused even more on the cup he was cleaning, a little embarrassed by the praise. They both sat in the silence of the other's presence until the small monitor at the end of the counter buzzed. "You must be Master?" Izuku asked before ever so slightly pushing the bottom of his mask up with his thumb and taking a sip of his tea. Kurogiri put away the cup he was cleaning and retreated into one of the rooms located in the back. "Apologies for only now introducing myself, Reaper." The monitor responded. "No apologies necessary. A man such as yourself is allowed to be late here and there." Izuku turned toward the monitor at the end of the counter. "So you know who I am?" Izuku could almost hear the smirk from the man behind the voice. He only hoped that one of his quirks wasn't sensing the shivers going up and down his spine. They were shifting on the other end of the monitor. Izuku imagined he was clasping his hands together. "Your plan is flourishing nicely, but how long will it take before the flowers start withering away?" Izuku felt like he was being crushed as the man spoke with a low, overpowering voice. Izuku didn't know what to say, he couldn't think. What did he know about what he was planning? Did he know? "You flatter me. Any seeds planted have only recently started sprouting." Izuku gripped the side of the bar counter with one hand and the side of his stool with the other. "So you say, child?" The buzzing of the monitor ceased. "Thank you for joining us on this journey through What If Deku became the most feared villain? We hope you found it as captivating as we did. A big thank you to Toast the Spaghetti in the Oven for creating such an engaging story. Don't forget to visit their profile on archiveofourown.org for more fantastic works. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Zenin Fanfics for more intriguing explorations into fanfiction and fantasy. Your support helps us create more content like this, and we love hearing your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section. See you soon in the next video.